and you are preventing access to that person or evidence, you're in violation of this. You have criminal culpability under this.
Okay, do you believe it's acceptable for illegals who commit heinous crimes be released back into the public instead of being detained and deported? Mayor Adams, yes or no?
Anyone break a crime?
Yes or no? This is not hard. Yes or no?
Anyone that break a crime should be detained.
Okay, Mayor. Yes or no?
They should be deported.
Okay, Mayor.
Any individual that
Yes or
causes
no?
harm
Yes or
and
no?
breaks
Okay,
the
Mayor
law
Wu.
should be held accountable.
This is why you have 6% approval rating, because you suck at answering questions.
I'm all going to be criminally referring you to the Department of Justice for investigation.
Welcome to No Border, No Country. We're talking about sanctuary mayors. They're in the news, Matt. 4 of the worst offenders came to Washington and were taking heat from Republican congressmen.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. This is like a group of people that comes in and sucks all the reason and logic and intelligence out of the room. And once you listen to them, you're less intelligent and informed than you were when you started.
This is so long overdue because for how many episodes on this show have we talked about Brandon Johnson and Michael Johnston from Denver and these people just bloviating from their little enclaves, and they've never really taken a lot of heat or being held accountable for what they've done. And finally, at least, they heard the criticisms.
It's long overdue, and let's put into context exactly what they're doing. For some strange reason, these people think because they don't like immigration law that they're entitled to unilaterally decide that they're just not going to apply it in their jurisdictions. I mean, this is no different than if these folks decided to not apply federal environmental law, not apply federal laws having to do with postage, not apply the Second Amendment. Of course, if anybody attempted to do any of those things, someone would have a fit. But for some reason, these people think this is okay when it comes to immigration. And they become these virtue signaling monsters who try and portray themselves as doing something that's moral and upright and upstanding, while the illegal aliens that they're helping avoid ICE, destroy the public fisc in their jurisdictions. They eat up money like it's going out of style, and they go on rampages committing crimes against U.S. citizens.
Now, you testified on the Hill recently. We covered this in the last episode, and that hearing ran, about 3 hours, would you say?
Yeah, a little over 3 hours, I think.
This sanctuary hearing ran over 6 hours, and we have watched the whole thing and spared you, the audience, the
yes, indeed,
the burden of sitting through that whole 6 hours, but we've culled the best of it out, and we're going to watch some clips here. And you may have seen some of the most outrageous clips, but we've got some other ones that you may not have seen that are just wild. This was not a boring hearing.
No, it was not a boring hearing because it's shocking to hear how hypocritical and self-contradictory these people are, and to them it's this big dance where they're trying to show themselves to be morally superior when they don't have any clue as to how to be tied to any kind of moral compass. They contradict themselves so often.
So let's get right down to it. The first one we're going to look at is Congressman Andy Biggs from Arizona. He is a very consistent border hawk. He's very good on these issues. This wasn't a real sensational clip, but he put a board up with a relevant piece of law there and explained why these sanctuary mayors are in violation of that law with the policies they're pushing.
Yeah, which they have been ever since they started doing this. I believe this actual piece of legislation was passed after about 20 years of this sanctuary nonsense, which started in the late 70s, and this came out probably in the Immigration Reform and Control Act around that era. And there's been a lot of argument over what it means, but the fact is that it pretty clearly indicates that sanctuary cities are illegal, And nobody should have to say that sanctuary jurisdictions are illegal in the first place. It's a shame that this statute had to be put into effect because it should go without saying that you can't violate federal laws, whether it's the immigration law or any other law.
All right, let's watch this.
In conducting investigations and hearings, immigration officers and administrative law judges shall have reasonable access to examine evidence of any person or entity being investigated. If you're holding someone back, even if it's under a civil warrant, because that's what you said you're not going to participate in, and you are preventing access to that person or evidence, you're in violation of this. You have criminal culpability under this. And you'll notice there's no mens rea requirement here. This is it. Every one of you is exposed to criminal culpability here. That's the reality of it.
So to put that into context, the argument that a lot of these sanctuary city advocates make is that most people who are deported, even if they've committed a crime and been convicted of a crime under state law or even under federal law, they wind up being deported under civil administrative law. Immigration proceedings are civil proceedings. However, there are a lot of significant things that can get you in a lot of trouble that are civil proceedings. Most of what the SEC does is a civil proceeding. A lot of the things that the Internal Revenue Service do are civil proceedings. There's nobody claiming that the SEC and the Internal Revenue Service don't have any authority because they're engaged in civil administrative tasks, but that's the argument that typically gets made by the sanctuary advocates.
Now, the mayors who were at this table that we're going to see are Eric Adams from New York, Michael Johnson from Denver, Brandon Johnson from Chicago, and Michelle Wu from Boston. Now, you'll see here, they had a very clever strategy when they were testifying here because they were pressed very hard. They said, do you follow the law, or are you in violation of the law, as Biggs is saying there? And almost to a person, they said, well, we're not breaking the law. Any ICE agent that comes to us requesting a criminal, help me out now. What are they? There's a distinction there, a civil and a criminal.
Yeah, so the distinction that they always try and make is they say, well, any ICE agent or officer who comes to us with a signed judicial warrant, we'll be happy to turn the person over. There's a problem with that, however, and they know this, and this is the corner that they're trying to force this all into. There is no federal common law. There's a bunch of cases from the Supreme Court and across the federal appellate court saying that. Common law is the body of law that's derived from judges' decisions. They're considered fundamental principles of justice, and you don't need a statute. So like the rules of evidence in Massachusetts, there's no statute with the rules of evidence for court. It's all been compiled from judicial decisions over time. In a state court where there's common law, judges can issue warrants for anything over which a court can take cognizance. In the federal government, it doesn't work that way. Federal judges can issue warrants only for things that statutes authorize them to issue warrants. And they can issue warrants for arrest and for search and seizure associated with crimes because there's provisions in the criminal code that say that they can do that. The ability to issue warrants for civil arrests come from the different statutes dealing with all of the different civil offenses that can come up. Immigration, because it's civil and administrative, falls into a different category. There are certain things in which the government has such an overriding interest. The government's interest is more significant than that of the public because they're things that are necessary to preserve the public safety, that the government doesn't have to have a judicial warrant. The warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment can be satisfied by a statute that authorizes either someone other than a federal judge or some enforcement officer within the agency to issue the warrant. And the reason that passes constitutional musters, for most of these civil things, you can't wind up in jail. It's not a criminal penalty. The purpose of the civil offense is you've breached an obligation owed to the government, and that's made right by either a civil order requiring you to do something or requiring you to pay a fee. So that whole argument is it's complete BS, and there's this constitutional provision that you can issue an administrative warrant without a judge in what's called a pervasively regulated field.
So we know that these sanctuary mayors, they don't want any illegals being taken out of their communities. So what's the angle here? Is it much more laborious or time consuming for ICE to get the judicial warrant that they're saying they require?
No, ICE can't. There's no way that ICE can turn up in a court and say, hey, we want a civil warrant, because there's no statute authorizing a federal judge to do this. If ICE is arresting somebody on a criminal charge, then they can go before a federal magistrate or a federal judge, and they can ask for a Fourth Amendment warrant. But for a civil arrest, there's no statute authorizing this. There's no statute authorizing an immigration judge to do it. The Immigration and Nationality Act says that immigration officers, whenever they think that a foreign national is about to flee, somebody who's in violation of the immigration laws is about to flee, they can arrest that person and detain them in order to determine their immigration status. If they obtain information that indicates that individual is likely in the U.S. in violation of immigration laws, they can arrest that person, and then they're required to go before a supervisor at ICE and request an administrative warrant. Alternatively, if they know where someone's going to be and they think that the person is not likely to flee, before they even go out to effectuate the arrest, they can apply for an administrative warrant from a supervisor at ICE.
So it sounds like this is a cynical move by these mayors. They're trying to make it sound like they're complying with the law, but in reality, they're not.
Well, I think it's even worse than that. It's a cynical move by organizations like the ACLU that have legal training and know that you cannot get a warrant in these circumstances. And so they're hiding behind that. But the issue is that civil warrants have been a thing since before the formation of the Republic. They've been part of English common law for probably, 800, 1,000 years. So administrative warrants are real. The fact that the anti-borders contingent, the sanctuary city advocates don't like them, doesn't mean that they don't pass constitutional muster. And this is something that at some point the Supreme Court is probably going to have to resolve. But a case needs to go up to the court in order for that to happen, and so far it hasn't.
Okay, let's get into some of the fireworks here. We're mostly showing Republican congressmen because when the Democrats came up, they were lobbing softballs at these sanctuary mayors, and it was really boring. So the first one we have is Nancy Mace from South Carolina, and credit to these Republican congressmen because they really brought the heat. They were not going easy on these mayors, and they were really getting snarky, and it was really, it felt like it was just desserts for these mayors. So.
Well, and I would say to our viewers and listeners, listen carefully to the questions that are being asked and listen to the responses, because most of the questions that are posed in these hearings by the Republicans are factual questions. They say, what does the law say and what are you required to do? And the responses from all of these anti-borders, pro-illegal alien contingent mayors are emotional responses. So there's a definite attempt by the other side in this to engage in psychological warfare, and you have to listen carefully to what's being said in order to get to the root of this.
All right, here's Nancy Mace.
All of the mayors here today are actively working to harm the American people you represent. You all have blood on your hands. I'm going to ask a series of yes or no questions today, and I would like to remind all of you, you are under oath. I only want a yes or a no to my questions. My first question, do you acknowledge breaking into our country as a crime? Mayor Adams, yes or no? Do you acknowledge breaking into our country as a crime?
I acknowledge.
Yes or no?
I acknowledge.
Okay, Honorable Johnson, he's not going to answer the question. Yes or no? Is breaking into our country against the law? Yes or no?
Depends how you cross the border.
Okay,
Some folks
Mayor
have
Johnson,
status.
yes or no?
Comprehensive immigration
that's not an
reform
answer.
policies
Mayor
are what's
Wu?
necessary in
Mayor
this
Wu,
moment.
do you have a better answer than these gentlemen before you? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, do you believe it's acceptable for illegals who commit heinous crimes be released back into the public instead of being detained and deported? Mayor Adams, yes or no?
Anyone break a crime?
Yes or no? This is not hard. Yes or no?
Anyone that break a crime should be detained.
Okay, Mayor. Yes or no?
They should be deported.
Okay, Mayor.
Any individual that
Yes or
causes
no?
harm
Yes or
and
no?
breaks
Okay,
the
Mayor
law
Wu?
should be held accountable.
This is why you have 6% approval rating, because you suck at answering questions. Mayor.
So that is really the definition of pulling no punches with your questions there.
Without a doubt. God bless Representative Mace.
Yeah, and you'll hear this if you watch the whole thing a lot. Brandon Johnson in particular, he was so programmed for this hearing. He had these stock answers he was giving. Now, you see very clearly she's asking yes or no questions. And what he said there was, well, I believe in a comprehensive immigration reform legislation or something to that effect, AKA amnesty. Really? Isn't that what he's driving at?
Well, yeah, and this goes back to the point I was making before. This is what they do. It's they don't want to answer the question. So I will give for our viewers and our listeners answers to those questions. Yes, it is a crime to enter the United States illegally. So 8 U.S. Code Section 1325, I believe it is called improper entry of an alien. And it says that if you enter the United States at any place other than a port of entry, and if you enter anywhere along the border without undergoing, whether it's at a port of entry or elsewhere, without undergoing inspection by an immigration officer, you've committed a misdemeanor crime. A second offense is a felony crime. That's backed up by unlawful reentry, which means if you've been in the United States before anyway, legally, illegally, and you've been ejected, i.e. deported, reentering the country without authorization is a crime.
I said before that a lot of the Democrats were just giving softball questions to these mayors, but they were doing a lot of other things too. One of the things we noticed is that they were trying to disrupt and slow down this hearing as much as possible, and they were primarily doing that by stopping the proceeding to introduce articles and other documents they wanted to enter and taking as long as they could possibly take to do it. The worst offender of this was Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, who is one of the biggest bomb throwers on the left on Capitol Hill. I mean, she's a charter squad member and just really bad. And she's often confused with Marvin Hagler on the Hill, but I assure you she's a congressman or woman. Anyway, here's an example of her disrupting the meeting and really getting contentious with the committee chairman.
Chair recognizes
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent
Subramaniam.
request. Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Proceed.
I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, and I'll do this as a survivor of sexual violence myself. This is from Courts, March 2018.
Without objection, so ordered.
Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born
Without objection, so ordered. We've put it in the record.
I haven't entered it.
You have what?
Mr. Chair, can I have several articles. I need to enter them. Let me just go ahead with what the articles are, what they speak to.
What's the next article?
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans
that is
commit
not-
more rape
Presley,
and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you
Data
all
from
trying to get
Texas
thrown out of
shows
committee
that
so you can get on
US-born
MSNBC
Americans
is going to
commit
end.
more
We're not
rape.
going to put up with it.
This is
Chair
my
recognizes
procedural
Mr.
right as a
Subramaniam.
member of this committee
You can
to
go.
enter
You
documents
can go with
into the
Mr.
record.
Frost and Mr.
I'm
Green.
reclaiming my time.
That's
You
what
do
you
not
want.
get to
No.
dictate
Ms. Presley,
how
I've been
I
very,
recite the
I have
articles
been very
for the
accommodating
record.
to you. Mr. Subramaniam,
And I
start
take
the
particular
clock.
umbrage
Start
as a
the clock.
survivor
No, I
of
don't.
sexual violence.
Go.
I will enter
Order.
into the record. This is my right. Thank you.
No. It is Mr. Subramaniam.
Mr. Chair.
No, you know the process of unanimous consent.
Matt, wasn't that just shameless grandstanding and trying to make it all about her?
Well, it was complete shameless grandstanding. Why the people of Massachusetts, my home state, elected this idiot, I will never know. I'll never understand. She just gets up there and focuses on anything but what the actual issue is. They offer these things without any context, without any attempt to relate it to the subject, and it's just inflammatory. And so that's beyond offensive because she's taking a hearing in a democratic republic that is intended to provide the public with information necessary to understand the issue. And she's deliberately skewing that by presenting information out of context and information that it's virtually impossible for it to be accurate unless it's just that simple statement that yes has a hard number, in which case it's irrelevant anyways because that's just how math works.
And throughout the course of the hearing, she pulled this multiple times. It seemed like whenever a Republican was really landing haymakers on one of these mayors, she would do this to slow it down, take some heat off the mayors. So it was clearly a tactic. But we got back to questioning here, and we had the next one was Byron Donalds from Florida, who's a very pro-borders congressman, allied with President Trump. So here's what he had to say.
Mayor Johnson, Chicago. How much has the city of Chicago spent on illegal immigration?
If you're referring to the 2022 up to 2024 of the buses coming from Texas, roughly the same percentage of the state of Texas, about 1% of our overall budget.
What is that? Because I don't have the city's budget in front of me. Numbers.
It's 1%, and if you want the actual calculation, we can make sure someone...
You're the mayor. You don't have the math in front of you?
It's 1% of the overall budget over the last 4 years.
That's why you're a failing
which
mayor.
is
Mayor
the same
Adams,
number that
how
was
much did
sent
the city
from us
of New York
from the
actually
state
spend
of
on
Texas.
illegal immigration? Mayor Johnson, I already asked you. You don't have a hard number. And if you don't have a hard number, you're not running your city well.
We've had Pastor Lowry from Chicago on here before, and he is no fan of Brandon Johnson. And we can see why Brandon is so unpopular in his city. He doesn't even know what the budget of the city is or how much they're spending on this problem.
Oh, he knows exactly what the budget of the city is, and he knows exactly what the hard number is. He just doesn't want to give it. See, how do I know he knows what the budget is and what the hard number is? Because you can't give special treatment to illegal aliens unless you know who the illegal aliens are. And you can't pull from your special slush fund that you create to pay for the luxury hotels and everything else that you're giving to the illegal aliens unless you know who the illegal aliens are. So that is a classic example of somebody getting up in front of Congress and lying. He knows full well everything that was being asked for. He just doesn't want to put it up there because the city budget of Chicago is larger than the budgets for some entire countries in Latin America. And even 1% of that is going to be a massive number. And he doesn't want to have to try and explain not only to the citizens of Chicago that are sane, but also to the rest of the American public, why were you spending American taxpayer dollars, inevitably a proportion of it that came from the federal government, on uninvited trespassers who came into the United States and committed crimes?
There was one point in the hearing where Brandon was bragging that the crime rate has dropped since he became mayor, and one of the congressmen pointed out that the crime rate in Chicago was higher than the crime rate in Haiti, and our State Department had issued a travel advisory not to go to Haiti because of the crime. So that's really nothing to brag about.
Well, it's nothing to brag about. I wonder if it's actually true. And number two, how much of that is, how much of that crime rate is dropping because people are fleeing Chicago the way that people fled London during the plague in the Middle Ages? I mean, eventually the capacity of the criminals to commit crime is dependent upon how many predators are there that they can prey upon. And if the prey leaves, then the predators usually go somewhere else in search of easier prey. And that may be what's happening here. It's also entirely possible that the crime rate is dropping because the illegal alien elements like Tren de Aragua and some of the other vicious gangs coming from these war-torn countries proved to be tougher than the Chicago street gangs, and the street gangs backed off because they were getting their butts kicked. So, I mean, it could be any of those things or any combination thereof. But for a guy with completely fiscally and socially irresponsible policies like his to get up and go, well, the level of crime is dropping in my city and it's entirely due to my wisdom, it's just completely disingenuous. It does not stack up with objective reality.
One of the complaints that observers of these kind of hearings will say is that, it gets heated, there's some fireworks, but at the end of the day, nothing really happens. There's no actual news. It's just a lot of debate, grandstanding, as we saw with Pressley. But there was some tangible news that came out of this because one of the people that came up next was Paulina Luna, who's one of the rising stars in Congress and very much an ally of Trump and his border policy. She had a few bombs to drop on these mayors. So check this out.
To me, after this line of questioning, it's very clear that these policies that you have all implicated are active and alive and well in your cities, are in direct violation with U.S. Title 8 Code subsection 1324, and it is a federal offense. But you all speak about a broken immigration system, and yet here you guys are aiding and abetting in that entire process. I want to be very clear about something. Open border policies, which is something that you guys are talking about, hurts people on both sides, meaning the people that are coming here illegally and then American citizens as well. I do not think you guys are bad people, but I think that you are ideologically misled, which is why, unfortunately, based on your responses, I'm all going to be criminally referring you to the Department of Justice for investigation. And as soon as I leave here, these will be going over to Pam Bondi. I'm not doing that in an effort to bully you guys, but I do believe that your policies are hurting the American people, and you can make that known with the evidence that you can present to the Department of Justice. But if you guys continue doing what you're doing, you're not going to help anyone. You're going to hurt more people, and that's exactly why I'm tired of it. The American people are tired of it. And Chairman, I yield my time.
Now, that's what the American people want to see in these hearings. These people are clearly in violation, as you've explained. And by the way, she said, I'm referring you to the Justice Department. That's better than just a lot of talk, right?
Well, it's better than a lot of talk, but there's three different things that we need to unpack that she said there. So the first one is, this is not just something that you say, it's an actual offense. Well, I'm sure people are going, well, if it is, how come nobody's taking a look at it? This is the problem. I have said this before. I'll say it again. I'll probably say it 1,000 more times. Immigration law is just like every other area of law. Nobody, Republicans, Democrats, anyone, is entitled to just ignore it because they dislike it. So how come nobody has been prosecuted or at least examined and investigated under any of these provisions of law before? Well, because nobody wanted to do it. It's controversial. It creates press opportunities for people like Pressley to get up and grandstand. And so in the past, a lot of Republicans have not requested that the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's offices actually investigate these things. Now, the other thing she said is that this hurts people on both sides. It does. All of these people act like they're doing some favor for the downtrodden of the world because the United States is responsible for all the problems everywhere. That's complete BS. Every country in the world has a border, and they have regulations about who can enter and how long they can stay. And then the third thing that I think that needs to be addressed is I disagree with the Congresswoman. I don't think these are basically good people who are misguided. I think these are people who are deliberately doing this for political gain. Basically, they are exploiting the American people and exploiting foreign nationals in order to give themselves a soapbox to operate from so that they can engage in this false moralizing and virtue signaling, making people think that they're doing this wonderful thing when all it comes down to is they are simply breaking American laws because they don't like them. You know what? There's all kinds of laws all day, every day that I don't like, but I still have to obey. These are people who have been elected and placed in positions of trust by the American public. They're the last people that should be violating any laws.
Now, we know that Attorney General Pam Bondi is not a wallflower, that she came in promising to be aggressive and to reform DOJ and go after a lot of people that maybe aren't normally facing justice. Going after these sanctuary mayors would really take it to a new level. What do you think is the likelihood that something's going to come of this?
Well, I think it's pretty likely because we've heard it come from Pam Bondi, we've heard it come from Vice President J.D. Vance, and we've heard it repeatedly from our own former fellow, now border czar, Tom Homan. And, I think the most compelling case is coming from Tom Homan because he's out on the streets with the agents who are dealing with these violent criminals who are being shielded by places like Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, New York City. And it's untenable. I mean, it does not make any sense why a mayor in an American city, most of whom chronically never have enough funds, chronically never have enough resources to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish, to invite criminals from foreign countries and then, aid those criminals in avoiding and evading federal law enforcement who's trying to take these foreign nationals out of the United States. And this is not just me exaggerating. I mean, we had an instance where a state judge in Massachusetts was conducting a hearing for an individual who was not a foreign national, who was an illegal alien, who ICE was in the courthouse waiting to take custody of. And the judge went soft on the individual and then ran him out the back door of the courthouse through her chambers in order to keep him from ICE. That is actually aiding and abetting a fugitive from federal law enforcement. And that was a supposed individual who was learned in the law and who was entrusted with wearing a black robe to administer justice. And judges in Massachusetts, like federal judges, are appointed for a lifetime appointment. I mean, that's not just shocking, it's offensive.
Yeah. And get ready, because if DOJ does come after these mayors, they will play the victim card to the hilt. They will act like they're just so persecuted and they're innocent as the driven snow, and the media will play right along.
Well, they'll play the victim card. There will be activist federal judges in certain district courts and certain federal circuits that will back them up. And quite frankly, you will have voters that will put these people back in office even if they're in prison. Historically, that's happened. Newark, New Jersey is famous for on several occasions electing a mayor who was actually incarcerated and couldn't serve in the position because they were in the custody of a corrections department. So this is the problem that arises when politics becomes either purely a popularity contest or purely an ideological contest. Politicians have a responsibility when they're elected to look out for the interests of all Americans, not just the ones that cast a vote in their favor and not just the ones that align with them ideologically.
So pretty much all these Republicans in this hearing were great. They were really bringing it. And this other one here was Brandon Gill from Texas. Check out what he had to say.
Great. First of all, do you support allowing illegal aliens to obtain driver's licenses? Just yes or no?
So the city of Chicago has been a welcoming city for over 40 years.
I'll take that as a yes. Next question.
And that's the policy that we will hold to.
Do you support tax dollars subsidizing or paying for the health care of illegal aliens?
I support investments in all residents of the people of Chicago, and that's what I do.
That's a yes as well. Do you support free or reduced college for illegal aliens?
Again, I support the investments of all residents of the people of Chicago.
Take that as a yes. Next question. Do you support allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections?
Again, I'm not over the jurisdiction of that type of law, but again, I'm committed to investing in all residents of the people of Chicago.
I'll take that as a yes. I've got an article from the Chicago Sun-Times, and I'll quote here briefly. Johnson proposed, among other things, that all residents, regardless of citizenship status, be able to vote for Chicago Board of Education members. Next question. Your website states, and this is your campaign website, quote, "I will not stop fighting until abortion access is completely secure for people all over the country," end quote. Yes or no, do you support taxpayer-funded abortions for illegal aliens?
I support the reproductive rights of all people, all women.
That is a yes as well. Your mayoral transition website mentioned support for creating a Chicago Board of Education non-citizen advisory board. Again, yes or no, do you support appointing non-citizens to government advisory boards?
I was invited here today to discuss welcoming cities.
Yes or no?
I was invited here to discuss welcoming cities.
This is a yes or no
If you're
question.
interested in asking me
You're not
questions
gonna
about the
filibuster.
welcoming
I'll
city,
take that as a
I'm
yes.
happy to
We're gonna
answer
move
those
on.
questions.
No, we're going to move on.
Brandon Johnson just can't answer a question honestly, can he? He's got these buzzwords and phrases he says, and I think it's important to decode these for the people out there listening. Welcoming city means sanctuary city in defiance of federal law. investments means massive government spending on foreign nationals who came here illegally. They just can't be honest.
Well, I mean, it's not even a question of not being honest. He just doesn't like the questions because they don't align with his political views. So, if Chicago doesn't have enough money in its budget to pay for itself, how is he investing in the population by giving illegal aliens a free education?
One of the talking points he kept going to was, I support investments for all people in my city. What he's not telling you there, though, is that every dollar he invests in someone here legally is a dollar not going to a legal resident. And that could be a homeless veteran, or it could be someone else who's here who needs that help desperately and isn't getting it.
Well, listen, when I was at Early's affiliated organization, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, we did a study, and we found that illegal immigration was costing United States taxpayers between $150 and $160 billion a year. If none of those illegal aliens were here and all of the other alien lawbreakers were ejected, how much of that money could be spent on U.S. citizens? If you wanted universal college tuition for everyone in the U.S. to attend a community college or a state institution, you could pay for it with that kind of cash. But instead, we're wasting those dollars on illegal aliens who have no right to be here in the first place.
So, Matt, as this hearing concluded, we had one more interesting tidbit. This was Representative Melanie Stansberry from New Mexico. She's a Democrat, very anti-borders, and she just went on this screed for like 5 minutes. I don't think she asked a single question the whole time. It was just like a soapbox speech. And I want you to listen to this, and we can dissect what she said because it's remarkable.
What they are doing is not making America safer. In fact, it's a total and complete lie because Donald Trump has failed to actually even secure the border. He's failed to stop illicit drugs like fentanyl from crossing the border. He's failed to secure sufficient staffing and technology to stop human trafficking and illicit drugs from crossing the border. He's failed to support local law enforcement and behavioral health programs to address the issues that are affecting our communities. And he's failed to even execute on the most basic thing that he said he would do, which was to pass immigration reform when he got into office. Here we are, Donald Trump. Where's your immigration bill? Oh, wait, you don't have one. That's right. Because none of this is actually about making America safer. In fact, all of this is making America weaker. He's dismantling our federal law enforcement that would actually go after cartels and drug traffickers. Over the last 6 weeks, Donald Trump has taken out the most senior FBI officials and the officials in our U.S. attorney's offices that were actually prosecuting the cases against the drug cartels.
Were you keeping track of all of that, Matt? There were a lot of points there that I'd like to challenge.
Yeah, I was paying attention to that. This woman is utter and complete moron. I can't believe she said any of that with a straight face. So where to even start? Donald Trump is not securing the border. The monthly encounters for each month since Donald Trump has taken office have dropped to record low numbers. Those are border encounters. That is the number of people that the Border Patrol finds at the border having either attempted to cross the border or already crossed but near the border. They've been anywhere from like 1,500 to 200 like a month when they were like 30,000 a day under the Biden administration.
Didn't Tom Homan say that the traffic is down like 80 to 90%?
Yes, he did. And I think it's going to get driven even lower than that. This claim that President Trump is not stopping fentanyl from coming into the border is so. The Biden administration simply turned a blind eye and let the drug dealers walk into the United States. And unless somebody coming through a port of entry was discovered with the drugs, they didn't do anything about it. And you hear my buddy Dan Goldman all the time going, well, the largest number of drugs that come into the United States come through ports of entry. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. The largest amounts of drugs that are regularly detected are coming through ports of entry because people have to undergo inspection at a port of entry. And one of the things that law enforcement is specifically looking for is contraband of any kind. So number one, of course, you're going to catch more of it at the ports of entry because that's where people are going through. Now, why do the drug smugglers send it through the ports of entry? Well, one, to shift the focus. When you get some doofus like Goldman going, well, you don't have to worry about the unsecured parts of the border because it's all coming through the ports of entry. Of course, the drug dealers aren't stupid. They know that the press is going to pay attention to this. Then you have to stop and take a look. Okay, if this is the rate at which this is being detected at the ports of entry that have thousands of people cross through them lawfully each day, how much is being missed at the ports of entry? And then the border is, close to 4,000 miles long. A lot of it is remote. A lot of it is unpoliced and not near any urban areas. So when this woman is talking about the technology necessary to secure the border, she is talking about sensors, drones, things like that. So, the arguments that she's making are just absolutely moronic. Now, this argument that President Trump has cashiered the prosecutors who were pursuing these cases, the U.S. attorneys and Department of Justice officials who have been released are the ones who weren't focusing on these cases. They were focusing on retaliating against the political enemies of the Biden administration and the Obama administration. They weren't busy jacking up drug dealers. So it's this is the usual thing. Look at the Wookiee. Look at the Wookiee. It's all shift the focus and deceive instead of addressing the real problems. Now, what is the Trump administration actually doing? As I said, they've reduced the number of border encounters to the lowest rates in history, not just in recent memory, in history. These are going lower than they've ever been since the Border Patrol was founded in 1924. That's the most absurd political, ideological, fictional screed that I have ever heard in the 30 years I've been doing this.
The other thing she said that I would take issue with is one of the first things was that Trump's policies have made America weaker. So securing the border, knowing who's coming across, deporting criminals is less preferable than what we had the last 4 years with this daily deluge of unvetted foreign nationals just streaming across the border. That makes America strong, and what we're doing now makes it weak. That's completely illogical.
Brian, how dare you speak such blasphemy? Diversity is our strength. Clearly, having Middle Eastern terrorists, Latin American gang and cartel members, and Eastern European human rights violators and Chinese spies improves the safety of the United States because we gain a diversity of cultural outlook and of political opinion.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Immigration Reform Law Institute, go to irli.org. If you found this information useful and you'd like to support the show, go to irli.org/podcast. You can also hear this show on Apple Podcasts, Rumble, and Spotify. And don't forget to check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again.